It began subtly with little things. Her laughter felt distant, her glances colder. The warmth that once lit up her face when I walked into the room seemed replaced by a forced smile. I dismissed it at first, blaming her work deadlines and stress. But there were nights she stayed late at the office, texts she shielded from my view, and moments she seemed 1,000 miles away, even as we sat together. I wanted to believe it was just a phase, something we could work through. I reasoned that every marriage has its ups and downs, and this was merely a rough patch. But there was something nagging at me, a gnawing unease in my gut that I couldn't shake. Deep down, I knew this wasn't just stress. Something had shifted, and I was too afraid to admit it. The love of my life, the woman I built my dreams around, was slipping through my fingers. I didn't know what I'd find, but I knew I had to look closer. When she told me about the upcoming team-building retreat, my stomach turned, though I couldn't pinpoint why. Her voice was light, almost cheerful, as she explained it was just for work. I nodded, pretending I wasn't concerned. "It's only for the weekend," she said with that distant smile. "Nothing to worry about." But I worried anyway. As I watched her pack, folding her favorite dress into her bag, I realized I couldn't remember the last time she wore it for me. When she left Friday evening, I felt hollow. I spent the weekend trying to distract myself, fixing the sink, mowing the lawn, catching a late-night movie on TV. But every task seemed meaningless. Her absence echoed in the empty house. By Sunday evening, she was back, acting as if nothing had happened. She kissed me lightly on the cheek, her lips cold, and asked how my weekend was. I told her it was fine, but I was lying to both of us. Mark and I hadn't seen each other in years, but we caught up over beers that Saturday while Rachel was away. As we reminisced, his tone shifted. "Hey man," he said hesitantly, "I saw Rachel a few weeks ago." My heart quickened. "Oh yeah? She's been busy with work." He nodded slowly. "She was at this bistro downtown. She wasn't alone." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Work dinner, probably," I muttered, forcing a smile. "It's part of her job." Mark didn't push it, but his look said enough. On the drive home, his words replayed in my mind. I tried to rationalize it. Rachel had always been career-focused. Networking was a big part of her position, right? But then I remembered her being vague about her plans that weekend, the way her tone shifted when I asked about her coworkers. I pulled into the driveway and sat in the car, staring at the dark house. The unease had found its roots. That evening, I decided to ask her. She was in the kitchen, humming softly as she poured herself a glass of wine. I leaned against the counter and tried to sound casual. "Mark mentioned he saw you downtown recently. Who were you with?" Her hand froze for a split second before she turned, her face a mask of calm. "Just a coworker," she replied breezily. "You know how it is?" Her laugh sounded forced. "It was a work thing." I nodded, studying her carefully. "Why didn't you tell me?" She shrugged, brushing past me. "It wasn't important." I wanted to push further, to demand answers, but her confidence threw me off. "Don't you trust me?" she asked over her shoulder. The question hung in the air like a trap. Trust. Of course, I trusted her. Didn't I? But the unease gnawed at my insides. I smiled faintly and let it drop, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was being hidden from me. That night, sleep refused to come. I stared at the ceiling, her question looping in my mind. "Don't you trust me?" It wasn't just the words, but the way she said them. Calm, calculated, as if daring me to challenge her. Trust. It was the cornerstone of our marriage, wasn't it? Yet, lying next to her, I couldn't ignore the growing distance. I glanced at her sleeping form, her back turned to me, her breathing even and untroubled. How could she sleep so soundly, while my mind raced with questions? Every memory of our time together felt tainted now. I thought of the weekend she claimed to be working late, the missed calls and the vague explanations. Were they all lies? My chest ached as doubts consumed me. I wanted to believe in her, to believe in us, but the cracks were growing. I closed my eyes, praying for answers, though I feared I already knew them. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. One evening, as Rachel hurriedly left for the gym, she forgot to zip her bag. It toppled over, spilling its contents onto the floor. Among the familiar items, her water bottle, sneakers, and towel, lay a sleek, unfamiliar phone. My heart stopped. Rachel had never mentioned a second phone. Why would she need one? Carefully, I picked it up. It was locked, but the notifications told enough of a story. A series of messages from a contact labeled B. They were brief, teasing, and unmistakably personal. My hands trembled as I placed the phone back. 1,000 questions flooded my mind. Was this paranoia justified? Or had I stumbled onto the truth? I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I decided to wait and see. If there was one thing I had learned in my career, it was that patience often reveals the answers you seek. I just didn't realize how devastating those answers would be. The next day, I jotted down the number from the hidden phone and sought help from a friend in cybersecurity. Reluctantly, he agreed to dig into the messages. When the results came back, they nearly broke me. The texts between Rachel and Brandon, as it turned out, were undeniable. They weren't just casual exchanges. They were intimate, laced with longing and secret rendezvous. The kind of words she used to say to me in the early days of our relationship. Can't wait to see you tonight. You make me feel alive again. I need you. My stomach churned. Each message was a dagger, confirming my worst fears. The woman I loved, the one I'd vowed to spend my life with, was sharing her heart and body with another man. I wanted to scream, cry, and lash out all at once. But instead, I sat there, numb, as the weight of betrayal settled in. She had chosen him over me. Brandon wasn't just a random fling. He was her coworker, a man I vaguely remembered her mentioning in passing. A rising star at her company, charming, successful, and several years younger than her. I felt sick. The text revealed a pattern. Secret lunches, stolen weekends, and late-night calls. He was everything I wasn't. Fresh, exciting, untouched by the wear and tear of a decade-long marriage. My mind raced with comparisons. Was he better than me? Smarter? More attractive? Had I become so ordinary, so dull, that she needed to seek someone else? My insecurities began to spiral. The thought of them together was unbearable. Every laugh she shared with him, every touch, every kiss. It was a betrayal not just of our vows, but of the life we had built together. I clenched my fists, determined not to let my anger consume me. If they thought they could humiliate me and destroy my life, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. After the initial shock wore off, my pain transformed into something colder and sharper. Anger. Betrayal demands a response, and I was determined to make mine unforgettable. But I wouldn't be reckless. If Rachel had taught me anything during this ordeal, it was the importance of playing the long game. I started planning carefully. A confrontation wouldn't be enough. Words could be denied, and anger could be dismissed as overreaction. No, I needed something undeniable, something that would hit her as hard as her betrayal had hit me. Her company's annual gala was 2 weeks away, a grand event where she and Brandon would undoubtedly be flaunting their connection under the guise of professionalism. That would be my stage. With a calm exterior masking the storm inside, I began gathering what I needed: evidence, witnesses, and a plan. If she had turned our life into a lie, I would make sure everyone saw the truth. Over the next week, I compiled a mountain of evidence. I combed through her texts, downloaded incriminating photos, and saved every damning detail. Each piece was a fresh wound, but I pushed through, knowing I needed proof. A tech-savvy friend helped me retrieve deleted messages and access more of her hidden exchanges. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. Their affair wasn't just physical, it was emotional. She called him the one, shared her dreams with him, and mocked me in ways that left me gutted. I also dug in her financials. Hidden transactions confirmed weekends away and expensive gifts, things she had never mentioned to me. The puzzle was complete, and it painted a devastating picture of a woman I no longer recognized. By the time I finished, I felt hollow, but the USB drive in my pocket was heavy with the truth. It wasn't just evidence. It was a weapon, and I was ready to use it. I didn't want to just confront her. I wanted the world to see what she had done, to force her to face the consequences of her choices. A friend in media helped me create a video, a devastating compilation of her betrayal. It began innocently enough, with photos of us as a couple, our wedding, our vacations. Then it shifted. The texts, the photos of her and Brandon together, and audio clips from her secret phone played in stark contrast to the life we had built. The final segment was a video of her laughing with Brandon, their hands brushing across a candlelit table, their eyes locked in a way that left no doubt about what was happening. It wasn't just proof. It was a narrative of how she had destroyed our marriage. Watching it brought tears to my eyes, but I didn't turn away. I needed to see it, to steel myself for what came next. This was my truth, and soon, it would be hers too. The USB drive became my constant companion. I carried it everywhere, as if its presence would somehow shield me from the pain I felt. Every time I touched it, I was reminded of my purpose. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my dignity. Rachel had turned our love into a joke, a secret she shared with another man. But the joke was about to be on her. I rehearsed what I would say. Imagine the look on her face when the truth came to light. Would she deny it? Would she cry? Would she realize, too late, the magnitude of her betrayal? I didn't know, and I didn't care. The only thing that mattered was the moment I would reveal everything. I tucked the drive into my jacket pocket as the day of the gala approached, feeling both dread and exhilaration. The storm was coming, and I was ready to unleash it. The night of the gala arrived, and Rachel was radiant. She wore a sleek black dress, her hair cascading in loose waves. Her laugh echoed through the room as she mingled with co-workers and clients, exuding effortless charm. I watched her from across the room, feeling a bitter cocktail of love, anger, and betrayal swirl in my chest. How could she pretend so well? How could she look me in the eyes every day and lie so seamlessly? She introduced me to colleagues as her wonderful husband, a phrase that turned my stomach. Among the crowd, Brandon lingered in the background, his presence subtle but unmistakable. Their shared glances, the fleeting touches, spoke volumes. They thought they were untouchable, their affair hidden behind the polished veneer of professionalism. But tonight, the facade would crack. As the evening wore on, I slipped away to the control room, my heart pounding with anticipation. The stage was set, and the truth was moments away from being revealed. The lights dimmed as the master of ceremonies announced the presentation, a year-in-review video celebrating the company's achievements. Applause filled the room as the first slide appeared on the screen, showcasing smiling employees and successful projects. But the mood shifted as the footage abruptly changed. The audience fell silent as text messages filled the screen, followed by images of Rachel and Brandon. Their stolen moments, laughing together, holding hands, kissing, were laid bare for everyone to see. Gasps rippled through the room, followed by murmurs of disbelief. Rachel froze, her face draining of color as her laughter died on her lips. I stood at the back, watching her world unravel. Her colleagues exchanged glances, some whispering her name. Brandon shifted uncomfortably, his expression a mix of anger and panic. When the final image, a photo of them entwined in a hotel room, flickered on the screen, the room erupted. The truth was out, and there was no taking it back. The chaos that followed was surreal. Rachel staggered toward me, her expression wild with panic and disbelief. "How could you do this?" she hissed, her voice trembling. But I didn't flinch. This wasn't my betrayal. This was hers. She glanced around the room, her colleagues staring at her with judgment and pity. Brandon attempted to approach her, but she shoved him away, her voice cracking as she whispered, "Stay away from me." I stood silently, watching the fallout unfold. The whispers grew louder as people pieced together the truth. Rachel turned back to me, tears streaming down her face. "Please, we need to talk," she begged, reaching for my arm. I stepped back, my voice steady but cold. "Talk to them," I said, gesturing to the crowd. "They seem interested in what you have to say." Her face crumpled, and she stumbled toward the exit, Brandon trailing behind her. I didn't follow. I had made my point. News of the incident spread quickly. By the next morning, Rachel's affair was the talk of her workplace. Her colleagues viewed her differently now, not as the competent, charming woman they had respected, but as someone who had betrayed both her personal and professional values. Brandon fared no better. His reputation as a rising star was tarnished, his ambition overshadowed by his involvement in the scandal. I heard whispers of disciplinary action against him, though I didn't care enough to confirm. Rachel tried to reach out to me repeatedly, leaving tearful voicemails and sending long, apologetic texts. But I ignored her. There was nothing left to say. I had exposed her for who she truly was, and I wasn't interested in her excuses. The humiliation I felt in discovering her betrayal had now been turned back on her, and though it didn't erase my pain, it gave me a sense of closure. She had chosen this path. I had simply revealed it. The morning after the gala, I called my lawyer and filed for divorce. There was no hesitation, no second-guessing. I couldn't stay married to someone who had so thoroughly betrayed me. My lawyer assured me that the evidence I had collected, particularly the financial records of Rachel's secret spending, would make the process swift and in my favor. "She's got no leg to stand on," he said, and I believed him. Rachel's frantic attempts to contact me only strengthened my resolve. Her apologies felt hollow, her promises to fix everything meaningless. This wasn't something that could be fixed. The life we had built together was over, and there was no going back. I signed the paperwork without a shred of doubt, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness as I handed it over. The end of our marriage wasn't just the end of a relationship. It was the end of the person I thought she was. But it was also the beginning of something new for me. Moving out of our home was harder than I expected. Every room held memories, some happy, some painful. The kitchen table where we used to share breakfast now felt like a monument to what we had lost. The bedroom, once a sanctuary, was now a battleground in my mind. I didn't want it anymore. It wasn't just a house. It was a reminder of her betrayal. Rachel stayed behind, but I didn't envy her. The house, with all its memories, had become a prison for both of us. I found a small apartment across town, modest but comforting in its simplicity. It was a fresh start, untainted by the ghosts of our past. Packing my belongings was cathartic. I left behind anything that reminded me of her, determined to rebuild my life from the ground up. As I closed the door on the house for the final time, I felt a strange sense of freedom. It wasn't just a house I was leaving. It was the weight of her lies. The first few weeks in my new apartment were lonely, but necessary. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects to keep my mind occupied. On weekends, I started running again, a hobby I had abandoned during our marriage. The steady rhythm of my feet on the pavement became a form of therapy, helping me process my emotions. Friends reached out, offering support and encouragement. Some suggested dating, but I wasn't ready. Trust was a fragile thing now, and I needed time to heal. Instead, I focused on small victories, cooking meals from scratch, decorating my apartment, and rediscovering the things that brought me joy. Each day felt like a step forward, no matter how small. I wasn't just rebuilding my life, I was rebuilding myself. Rachel's betrayal had broken me, but it hadn't destroyed me. I was still standing, and that was something to be proud of. Little by little, I began to see a future without her, a future I could shape on my own. Rachel's letters began arriving a week after the gala. Long, rambling apologies filled with guilt and self-pity. She wrote about her regret, how she had made a terrible mistake, and begged for a chance to explain. The first letter arrived with tear stains blotting the ink, as though her anguish had seeped onto the page. I read it, but it did little to move me. The second letter came 2 days later, filled with promises to fix things, to make us whole again. By the third letter, I stopped opening them. They sat on my desk in a pile, their weight tangible but meaningless. Words couldn't undo what she had done. Each letter felt like a desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative, to rewrite the ending of a story she had already destroyed. I wasn't interested in her apologies. The damage was done, and no amount of letters could change that. I left them unopened, reminders of a past I was determined to leave behind. Eventually, I realized I couldn't rebuild alone. The betrayal had left deep scars, ones I didn't fully understand. I started therapy, unsure of what to expect, but knowing I needed help. Sitting across from a stranger, I poured out everything, the love we once shared, the lies, the humiliation. It was like reopening a wound, but instead of bleeding, I found myself slowly healing. My therapist helped me unpack the layers of pain, from the self-doubt Rachel's affair had instilled in me to the anger I still carried. She reminded me that Rachel's actions weren't a reflection of my worth. That was a hard truth to accept, but over time, I began to believe it. Therapy became a lifeline, a safe space to grieve and grow. I learned to set boundaries, to trust my instincts, and to forgive, not Rachel, but myself. I had spent too long blaming myself for not seeing the signs, for not being enough. Now, I was learning to let that go. While I worked to rebuild my life, Rachel's world seemed to crumble. Word of her affair had spread beyond the company, and her reputation was in shambles. Brandon had left the company under a cloud of disgrace, and Rachel's position as a respected professional was no longer secure. Her friends distanced themselves, her social circles growing smaller as the whispers grew louder. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she had taken a leave of absence, citing personal reasons. It didn't bring me satisfaction to see her struggle. It wasn't who I was, but I couldn't ignore the irony. The life she had traded our marriage for was unraveling, piece by piece. The man she had risked everything for was gone, and the admiration she once commanded had turned into judgment. In the quiet moments, I wondered if she regretted her choices. But the thought didn't linger. Her downfall wasn't my concern. I had my own life to focus on, and that was enough. Months after the gala, I saw Rachel for the first time. It was at a local coffee shop, one I had started frequenting since moving into my apartment. She looked thinner, her face pale and drawn. She was standing in line, her hands clutching a cup as though it were the only thing holding her together. She glanced up, her eyes meeting mine. For a moment, she looked like the Rachel I had fallen in love with, vulnerable, almost apologetic. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but I turned away, pretending not to notice. My heart raced, but not with anger or sadness. It was indifference. Whatever she wanted to say, I didn't need to hear it. That chapter was closed. I took my coffee and left without a backward glance. Seeing her didn't hurt as I had feared. It simply reaffirmed that I had moved on. She was part of my past, and that's where she would stay. Not long after the encounter with Rachel, I met Emily. She wasn't someone I sought out. She happened into my life like a breeze through an open window. She worked at a bookstore near my apartment, and her warmth was undeniable. We struck up a conversation over a shared interest in classic literature, and something about her felt genuine in a way I hadn't experienced in years. I didn't tell her about Rachel at first. I wanted to know who I was without the weight of my past. But as we got to know each other, I found myself opening up. Emily didn't pity me. She didn't try to fix me or offer empty platitudes. She listened, and in her quiet understanding, I found a kind of healing I hadn't expected. We started spending time together, simple things like grabbing coffee or walking through the park. It wasn't a whirlwind romance, but it was real. For the first time in years, I felt hope. The divorce proceedings were mercifully swift. My lawyer ensured that Rachel's financial missteps and infidelity worked in my favor. We divided assets fairly, though the scales tipped in my direction. She kept the house, but I didn't want it. I walked away with enough to start fresh. A small victory in a painful war. Rachel didn't fight the settlement. She seemed resigned, as though she knew she had already lost more than just our marriage. Signing the final papers felt bittersweet. It was the official end of a decade-long chapter, one that had brought joy, heartbreak, and lessons I hadn't asked for. As I left the courthouse, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I was free, not just from Rachel, but from the doubts and fears that had plagued me since her betrayal. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but promising. I didn't know what it held, but I was ready to find out. The past was behind me, and that was enough. One evening, alone in my apartment, I decided to write a letter to myself. It wasn't something I had ever done before, but the idea felt right. I started with the man I was before Rachel's betrayal. Hopeful, trusting, perhaps a little naive. Then I wrote about the man I had become, scarred but resilient, broken but rebuilding. The words poured out, raw and unfiltered. I wrote about the pain, the anger, and the moments when I thought I wouldn't survive the weight of it all. But I also wrote about the strength I had found, the lessons I had learned. You are more than the worst thing that has happened to you, I wrote. You are more than her betrayal. By the time I finished, the letter was stained with tears, but I felt lighter. I folded it carefully and tucked it into a drawer. It wasn't meant to be read again. It was simply a reminder that I had survived, and I would keep surviving. The anniversary of what would have been our 10th wedding anniversary arrived quietly, almost unnoticed. I woke up that morning and checked the date on my phone. January 12th. In another life, it would have been a day for celebration. Dinner reservations, gifts exchanged, maybe a few quiet moments reflecting on the life we had built together. But now it was just another day. I didn't feel anger or sadness. Instead, there was a strange sense of relief. The anniversary wasn't a milestone anymore. It was a marker of something that had ended. I spent the day like any other, working on a project and grabbing lunch with a colleague. That evening, I went for a run, my breath visible in the crisp winter air. With every step, I felt lighter. The date had once been a symbol of love and commitment. Now, it was a reminder of how far I had come. I was moving forward, one step at a time. Forgiveness didn't come easily, and it didn't come all at once. For months, I carried the weight of Rachel's betrayal like a stone in my chest. I hated her for what she had done, for the lies she told, for the man she had made me doubt I was. But as time passed, the edges of my anger began to dull. Therapy helped, of course, but so did the simple act of living. Each new experience, each new connection, chipped away at the bitterness I felt. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. I couldn't erase what had happened, and I didn't want to. It was a scar, a part of me now. But I began to see forgiveness not as a gift to Rachel, but as a gift to myself. Holding on to resentment only kept me tethered to her, to the pain she caused. Letting it go was my way of reclaiming my life. It didn't happen overnight, but slowly I found peace. Rachel reached out one last time, months after the divorce was finalized. She sent a letter, longer and more thoughtful than the ones before. In it, she acknowledged the pain she had caused, the trust she had broken, and the love she had taken for granted. I see now that I ruined something beautiful, she wrote. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I needed to say this. I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in the same drawer as the letter I had written to myself. I didn't respond. What could I say? Her apology felt sincere, but it didn't change anything. It couldn't undo the past or erase the scars. I had already forgiven her in my own way, though she would never know it. Her words were a small comfort, a reminder that even she couldn't escape the consequences of her actions. But they weren't enough to reopen the door I had closed. The gala that had exposed Rachel's betrayal became an unexpected turning point for me. A year later, the company held the event again, and I was invited as a guest of one of their vendors. I debated attending, unsure if I wanted to revisit the scene of so much pain. But ultimately, I decided to go. Walking into the venue, I was struck by how different it felt. The room was the same, glittering chandeliers, clinking glasses, and soft music, but I wasn't the same. I was no longer the man standing in the shadows, watching his life fall apart. This time, I was laughing, mingling, and feeling genuinely at ease. Rachel wasn't there. I didn't know if she had left the company or simply chosen not to attend, and I didn't care. This wasn't her story anymore. It was mine. As I left the gala that night, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. The past was truly behind me. Months later, I saw Brandon for the first time since the gala. He was sitting alone at a cafe, his once confident posture replaced by a hunched, defeated look. He was thinner, his hair graying at the temples. He glanced up and saw me, his face blanching. For a moment, I thought he might say something, but he didn't. He simply looked away, staring into his coffee as if willing me to disappear. I didn't feel the anger I once might have. Instead, I felt a strange sense of pity. He had risked everything for Rachel, just as she had for him, and now it seemed they had both lost. Whatever thrill they had found in their affair had burned out, leaving only ashes. I didn't approach him. There was nothing to say. Seeing him like that wasn't satisfying, but it was a reminder that actions have consequences. He had made his choices, and now he was living with them. The scars Rachel left on me weren't visible, but they were deep. At first, I saw them as weaknesses, reminders of my failure to hold our marriage together. But as time went on, I began to see them differently. They were proof that I had survived. Every scar told a story of resilience, of growth, of finding strength in the face of heartbreak. I wasn't the same man I had been before Rachel's betrayal. I was wiser now, more cautious but also more self-aware. I knew what I wanted in life and in love, and I knew what I deserved. The scars didn't define me, but they reminded me of what I had overcome. They were a testament to my ability to endure, to rebuild, to start over. I wasn't ashamed of them anymore. They were part of me, and I carried them with pride. They weren't signs of weakness. They were badges of survival. Emily and I continued to build something real together. It wasn't perfect, no relationship ever is, but it was honest. She didn't try to fix me, and I didn't expect her to. Instead, we supported each other, learning and growing side by side. For the first time in years, I felt like I could trust someone completely. We didn't rush things. I wasn't ready to move in together or talk about marriage, and she respected that. Instead, we focused on the present, enjoying each moment as it came. Whether it was a quiet evening reading together or a weekend getaway, every experience felt meaningful. Moving forward didn't mean forgetting the past, but it did mean refusing to let it dictate my future. Emily wasn't my second chance. She was simply my next chapter. And for the first time, I felt like I was writing the story of my life on my own terms. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Letting go of the past was a process, not a single moment. I used to think it meant erasing the pain, pretending it never happened. But I learned that letting go meant accepting what had happened without letting it control me. Rachel's betrayal was a part of my story, but it wasn't the whole story. I didn't need to hold on to the anger or the regret anymore. They had served their purpose, fueling me when I needed the strength to stand up and move on. Now, they were weights I no longer had to carry. Letting go wasn't about forgiving Rachel for her sake. It was about freeing myself. When I looked in the mirror, I no longer saw the man who had been broken by her choices. I saw someone who had rebuilt himself piece by piece. The pain wasn't gone, but it no longer defined me. I was ready to let it drift away. Emily and I found a place together, a modest, cozy house on the edge of town. It wasn't flashy, but it was ours. The process of decorating and making it a home was deeply fulfilling. Each choice we made, whether it was the color of the walls or the bookshelves in the living room, felt like a step forward, a way to reclaim what I had lost. Moving in with Emily wasn't about erasing the past. It was about creating a future. We hung photos of our adventures on the walls, filled the space with laughter, and let it grow into a sanctuary. For the first time in years, I felt safe in a home. This wasn't a house haunted by betrayal and pain. It was a home filled with love, honesty, and possibility. As I unpacked the last box, I looked around and smiled. This was my fresh start, and I couldn't wait to see where it would take us. One of the most important lessons I learned was the power of choice. Rachel's betrayal had left me feeling powerless, like I was at the mercy of her decisions. But in the aftermath, I realized how much power I still had. I chose to confront her lies, to expose the truth, and to walk away from a marriage that no longer served me. I chose to rebuild my life, to seek help, and to find happiness again. Every step I took was a choice, and each one brought me closer to the man I wanted to be. Life doesn't always go the way we plan, but how we respond to its challenges defines us. I could have let Rachel's betrayal consume me, but I didn't. I chose to move forward, to build a new life on my own terms. The power of choice was mine, and I wielded it with intention. It was the most freeing realization of all. Rachel never found her redemption, at least not in the way I did. I heard through mutual friends that she struggled to rebuild her reputation and her life. Her relationship with Brandon ended shortly after the gala, and she never fully recovered from the fallout of her actions. I didn't feel satisfaction in hearing about her struggles, only a quiet sense of closure. Redemption isn't something you can force. It's something you have to earn. My redemption came not from revenge, but from rebuilding. It came from the moments of joy I found in small things, from the trust one began to feel in myself and others, and from the love I shared with Emily. Redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about rising above it. Rachel had chosen her path, and I had chosen mine. In the end, I didn't need her to fall for me to rise. I had already found my way back to myself. Loving Emily was different from loving Rachel. It wasn't built on the starry-eyed infatuation of youth or the untested promises of forever. It was rooted in understanding, in shared vulnerability, in the lessons we had both learned from our pasts. Emily didn't need me to be perfect, and I didn't need her to save me. We met each other where we were, flaws and all. The strength I found in our love wasn't about dependence. It was about partnership. We lifted each other up, celebrated each other's victories, and held each other through life's storms. For the first time, I felt what it meant to love without fear. Emily didn't erase the scars Rachel had left, but she showed me they didn't make me unworthy of love. With her, I found a sense of peace and stability I had thought was lost forever. Loving her didn't replace the pain. It transformed it into something beautiful. Looking back, I saw how far I had come. The man who had stood in that gala hall, shattered and humiliated, felt like a distant memory. I had reclaimed my life, one small step at a time. It wasn't an easy journey, but it was mine, and I was proud of it. My career flourished, my friendships deepened, and my relationship with Emily continued to grow. Even my relationship with myself changed. I stopped blaming myself for Rachel's choices and started celebrating the strength I had found in their aftermath. The scars she left remained, but they were no longer wounds. They were reminders of a life rebuilt, a testament to resilience. I wasn't the same person I had been before her betrayal, and I didn't want to be. I was stronger, wiser, and more grounded. The life I reclaimed was better than the one I had lost. It was a life I had built with intention and purpose. For the first time in years, I felt peace, not fleeting moments of calm, but a deep, enduring sense of contentment. The anger, the hurt, the longing, they no longer had power over me. They were part of my story, but they weren't the ending. Peace wasn't something I found in Rachel's downfall, or even in Emily's love. It was something I found within myself. It was in the quiet mornings when I sipped coffee on the porch, in the laughter shared with friends, in the simple joy of being present in my life. I had survived betrayal, endured heartbreak, and rebuilt from the ashes. And through it all, I had discovered who I truly was. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. As I stood on the threshold of this new chapter, I knew one thing for certain. I was at peace. And for me, that was enough. Thank you for watching the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss interesting life stories, and write a comment if you like the story. See you.